This seminar, just to give you a quick background, we started these seminars in 2018. We have a little lunchroom. If you continue down that hallway just a little bit, there were 10 people here because we just invited some folks that we thought would really, really enjoy it. And that was fun. We had a great time. And we were like, oh, we should do that again. So the next year we did a Facebook blast that's like, hey, we're going to have this seminar. We can fit 25 people in that room up there comfortably. And we had 25 people, and I was amazed. 25 people want to come and talk to us about this. This is incredible. Then COVID, right? So we didn't do anything for a while, right? And then this year, back in November, when I sent out the newsletter that said, hey, I think we're going to bring back the homeowner seminar, I had 27 people respond within 2 days saying they'd like to be on the list. So we knew last November that we had a tiger by the tail at this point, and it was like, oh my gosh, like how big is this thing going to be? So then we decided we would have it out here, and we had to cap it. We had a wait list, actually. And there are a few, for those of you standing, there are actually, if you don't want to be bashful, I promise I don't bite, there are chairs up here. There's a chair right there that I can see. Please do make yourself comfortable. And speaking of comfort, don't be bashful. If you want more snacks, I do not want leftovers. Please, please, please help yourself throughout the morning here while we're doing this. And that door that is open back there on the north wall, if you go through that door, on your right-hand side, there will be a bathroom. If you go through that door and the door that's in front of it, there will be another bathroom around front for those of you who have been here as customers before. So there are 2 restrooms here. At any point, feel free to keep yourself comfortable. That is, like, we are not going to be sticklers about anything around here. I did want to start with a couple of things just because I think it's helpful for people to see that if you've never been here before, I promise it's pretty when it's green. Right? So I have a little video here that I shot with our drone last year on just a particularly beautiful day, just to maybe get us in the mood for spring and summer. Eventually it will be lovely again outside, maybe not so much here today, but yeah, isn't that beautiful, right? And we'll talk a little bit about how we do what we do and everything like that. I will start things off. I'm going to talk about our history a little bit, the seed that we carry, the fertilizer that we carry, and then my father, Mike, who's floating around right over there, Dad, is going to talk about the sod and how we farm, how we actually produce the sod. And then as soon as he's done, Dad and then Dr. Nick Christians from Iowa State's Turf Department, they are going to do what I jokingly call Stump the Chump. Which is, the 2 of them will be up here. I made a little presentation that is full of ridiculous photos and also questions people have been asking us over the years of like, should I dethatch my yard? When should I aerate? What are some pro tips for fertilizing? And so these 2 are going to bounce off each other for the last portion of the thing. And hopefully it will be both enlightening and entertaining and not at all boring. We'll see what happens. So. All right, so quick bluegrass history. First off, I know there are new customers in here. If you have been a customer here in the past, will you please raise your hand? If you have been here, yay, thank you. Thank you for coming. This is our 54th year in business. It was the summer of '69, as Brian Adams likes to sing, that we started the farm. And the farm was actually started by my grandmother, Audrey, which is kind of unique. So the original farm was actually owned by my grandmother. This is my dad. As you can see, he hasn't aged a day. And the 2 of them worked together for several years before my parents bought the farm from my grandmother, Audrey. Our first office building right here was down at our old farm location. I actually remember this. This little room right back here had a little TV where I would watch Sesame Street. So I learned my counting to 10 with the count and all of that stuff in that room right there. And that is where bluegrass started. This is my dad and me. As you can see, we've been working together for several years at this point. This is a shot from our old farm location, which was located at 7707 Blair's Ferry Road. Does anyone remember the old location? Yay! Thank you for being longtime, wonderful human customers. We are so grateful for you. This location was the family farm. It had been in our family for a few generations. We had a lot of emotional ties to this ground, but there was a really big problem with it. And let's see if anyone in here can guess what the problem with that farm is. Yes, right here. Flooding, yes. You can see right up here, this is Otter Creek. And right back here is actually the Cedar River. And right over here is Wendling Quarry, if anyone knows the sand plant off on Blair's Ferry Road. So we were right next to the sand plant right here, but the Cedar River and Otter Creek actually met in that back corner of our property. And so as the years went by, as rain events became more severe, as the city of Cedar Rapids grew our way and there were more impermeable surfaces and the water tables were shifting, the flooding was becoming more intense. It would happen more often, and the floods were more extreme, to the point where eventually this happened, right? Can anyone guess this year? 2008. Yep. 2008 was the year that we said abandon ship, right? And that, for any of you who are farmers or who have farm ties, you know that that's a very emotional decision, right? This is our family farm. This is where memories and our family are incredibly intertwined. A testament to my dad and my mom, they are a force to be reckoned with. And they, through sheer will and wonderful, wonderful coworkers, were able to make a new start up here in Alburnett. Up here, it is high and dry. You will notice that we do not have a creek or the Cedar River here at our office, and we're very grateful for that. But we found something else up here. Can anyone guess what this was? Derechos, yes, and actually, there's my car right there. That was really fun. This right down here, this was our center pivot irrigation system. It probably would have made it, because we have center pivot irrigations on all of our fields. That one probably would have survived, except that concerned neighbor who called me yesterday to make sure our building wasn't on fire. He had a grain bin that blew through about a half a mile and came and caught the irrigation system, and they tumbled, and they became what I like to call the most expensive piece of lawn art that ever happened. Our irrigation guy, who's been doing his job for 40 years, he came out here and he stood here with his hands on his hips and he goes, "Well, that's the worst one I've ever seen." And I remember feeling like a weird point of pride about that. It was well, if it's gonna be trashed, you might as well go for number one, go big or go home, right? So that was quite the cleanup effort. And I mean, look at this, a lot of you have purchased sod from us. These pallets are not light, right? And you can't see it from this, but the stack of pallets was easily, I don't know, an eighth of a mile from where these were landing. That is just incredible to me. And many of them had hit the ground with such force that they were, there were 3-4 inch divots in the ground where those pallets had hit the ground. It was unbelievable. And I know we all have stories about that, but I just thought you would appreciate that. Why do we do these seminars, right? You don't have to read, there are a lot of words on here, but you will see down here where it says our passions are research-based innovation, elite products, precision farming, educating ourselves and our communities, and being responsible stewards of our agricultural and urban land. These seminars for us are a thing that we feel are fundamental to who we are, right? We hope there is something that you can take from this today that you find to be helpful, and even something that you potentially could share with your neighbors or friends that would help them to take better care of their land as well. We do a lot of tours out here. This is kind of a new thing that has happened organically as a result of the seminars that we do. We've had lots of teachers approach us and ask if they can come out and talk about precision agriculture and what we're doing. If you know anyone who falls under any of these group titles, these are groups who have come out here in the last 7 years. Last year we had 700 tour participants. The youngest was 4. And asked me my very favorite question that I got the entire year. I gave this whole presentation about tractors and here's how we steer them and all this stuff. And the kids were so into it because they love, all of that equipment and everything. And then we got to the end and I said, "Does anyone have any questions?" And he raised his hands and he goes, "Do you have a dog?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." I was not anticipating that such a hard-hitting question, but they're super cute. We had people all the way up to, we had a group of retired master gardeners who came out a couple years ago, and they were a hoot. They were all members of, I think it's called the Red Hat ladies or Red Hat Club. Do you know what I'm talking about? Oh my gosh. Also great questions out of them. Some basics that people ask us on a regular basis Kentucky bluegrass. We grow Kentucky bluegrass out here. Does anyone know how it got its name? Everyone's like, well, it's green. I don't understand. Why is it bluegrass? I don't get it. The picture here is a big, big hint. This is what Kentucky bluegrass looks like if it goes to seed. And you can see right here, there's actually these little, they're called florets right here on the end. So it actually puts on a blue flower. The entire species will if you let it go to seed. So that is where it gets its name. Kentucky bluegrass actually does put on a floret if you let it go to seed. It'll seed in the spring around May. So sometimes we get weird phone calls from people in May that are like, something is happening in my yard, I don't understand. Like, I think it's a disease. And it's like, I'm pretty sure it's just putting on seed heads and it's okay. That's just a part of life, right? We have 400 acres here at our new location, and those are in 3 different fields. It takes us about a year to grow a crop of sod, and so at any point in time, we have 200 acres ready for harvest and 200 acres in production for the following year. That's kind of how we manage the mayhem around here. We only cut to order, so you know that if you order something from us, it will be harvested within 2 hours of your scheduled pickup or delivery time. That is obviously a big difference from something that you would buy at like a big box store, right? It's always fresh. Once you cut it, that clock starts ticking, right? Because it's a perishable product. In essence, it's a glorified pile of compost waiting to happen, right? So the goal is to get it to someone as freshly as possible so that you have time on the back end to get your project done. We do certified seed out here, which is no regrowth. I'll explain later what that means. I promise it's important though, and it is part of why our fields look so beautiful. And people, the last question down here. So if I ever get to talking to someone, sorry about that. If I ever get to talking to someone about yards, usually I'll get like a confused face and someone will basically look at me like, how can you be excited about this? Grass is boring, aren't they all the same? And my response to them is always this: well, are all dogs the same? And we all know the answer to this question is obviously no, right? Like dogs is a species, and within the species of dogs, there are all these different breeds that have different characteristics and different looks, and they behave differently, and they have different needs, right? And grasses are the same. People just don't think about it because they're tiny, right? And so I like showing people this photo. This is a photo that we took a long, long time ago. Every one of these plots here is Kentucky bluegrass, and it's all been left to go to seed. And you can see that some of them are very tall, some of them are very short, some of them are kind of bluish in color, some of them are green, some of them are brownish in color. And within the species of Kentucky bluegrass, depending on who you ask, there's going to be somewhere around 350 different cultivars. And that's why if you go to a big box store and you buy some grass seed and you're like, I'm just going to fill in this little patch right here, and then it comes up a super weird color and you're like, no, undo what I did. That is why that's happening, right? Because statistically speaking, you are not lucky enough to pick one that is going to match, right, the sod that you already have. We do carry seed out here that matches the sod for those of you who have the sod, so just log that away in the back of your mind. But that is why when people ask us about, should I overseed my lawn, we will tell you to be very cautious about doing something like that, because this is what could happen. You could have lots of things mixed together that don't necessarily behave or look quite right when they're all together, right? So to talk about master blend, which is the seed that we grow out here, so we blend it here on site. It is something that you can only find here. And the seed that we choose for that, I'm sure you probably can guess from all of the instructions that came out about this, we're a little bit of, we tend to micromanage. We're a little bit obsessed with doing things really well out here. So we're really intentional about the cultivars that we're looking for when we blend into what we grow for our master blend sod. These right here are the qualities that we're looking for, and we use something called NTEP data for that. Dr. Christians could probably tell you all about NTEPs and how those work, but they're very specific tests that are done at land-grant universities all over the United States, where they put in these test plots and they deliberately subject grass seed to all kinds of pressures, right? Disease pressure, drought pressure, traffic tolerance, right? Like they go out there and they have these machines that like mimic a marching band essentially moving across it. And then they quantify all of that data and they post it in places where sod farmers can go and look for it and kind of see how these cultivars are performing. Then what we do is we make our list of what we're interested in. And we have test plots here that we have put in across the way. And so if there's anything that we think, you know what, like this is behaving in a way that is interesting, right? Like this is coming back with really good results. We'll put it in test plots across the way and then do our own tests on it and see how it does before we would work it into a mix that's out here. We are looking specifically, the qualities we are looking for are things that are genetically dark, right? I'm gonna make you start guessing and answering questions now. So what is a good reason why we would be looking for something that is naturally dark in color? What'd you say? Yeah, that's part of it, yes.
Resistance to sunlight?
Oh, resistance to sunlight. I don't know the answer to that question. That is, actually, you might know the answer to that question.
I don't know of anything that would lead me to believe that,
Yeah.
that a darker variety would be more.
So I admit, we are a little more nefarious than that. We like to grow something that people are less likely to feel like they need to over-fertilize, right? Because why do people fertilize? One, they want their yard to look nice, but two, people are often trying to get that dark green color, right? And so one way that we can kind of, in a sneaky sort of way, mitigate over-fertilization in yards is to have something that is already predispositioned to be dark in and of itself, right? So people are less tempted to go out there and do what we call the moron approach, which is putting more on of something that you really don't need, right? So we are trying to avoid the moron approach, right? Dwarf varieties, we are intentionally growing dwarf cultivars that grow very slowly. Why do you like that? Less mowing, yes, right? So it's less time for you, less mowing, and less fossil fuel usage, right? Dense growth habit, that means that these plants like to be basically crowded together. Why is that an advantage for you? Yeah, less runoff, yes, fewer weeds. Yes, I heard it right up here, right? Because weeds thrive where there's no competition, right? And so it means less herbicide usage, right, is gonna be necessary, right? If we've got a nice dense cover. Disease resistance, drought resistance, and insect resistance, I just put in there to be funny because all of the Ds that were in there. But these are pretty self-explanatory, right? We don't have to use fungicides as much, we don't have to use insecticides as much if we have something that just naturally is going to be able to defend itself, right? Okay. Oh, whoops, wrong way. Try them out. We have sorry, forgot about this photo. Seed genetics. Here is an example of why this is important. This is actually a picture of my dad on this little tractor down here. He is mowing at our old farm. And this, I like to use this as an illustration because we have always been passionate about seed genetics and we've always tried to have just like the top possible quality that you can get. But things evolve over time, right? So the top possible quality you could get in the 80s when this photo was shot versus what we can do now, I mean, it is wildly different. Think of the top of the line car in the 80s versus the top of the line car now, right? Like they have totally different characteristics and abilities. Can anyone tell me what is happening in this photo? And I'll give you a big hint. The mower is not on fire. It's not water. Can anyone? Close. This is actually, these are spores. This is from a disease called powdery mildew. And way back when, these are midnight types that we were growing way back then, and they were very, very susceptible to a disease called powdery mildew, even though they were beautiful in every other way. Every golf course wanted everything that was a midnight type. So everybody wanted it. It was top of the line, but it had a fatal flaw right here, right? Well, it wasn't really fatal. Powdery mildew is not going to kill the grass. But anyway, but it was susceptible to a disease. And guess who isn't going to like going out and mowing that all the time? Everybody, right? So this is what I mean about genetics change, cultivars change. It matters what you're growing, right? Okay, State of the Union, seed. Many of you will know the last couple years, the prices of grass seed and the availability of grass seed were insane. And there were two major reasons for that. The first is prior to COVID, and this always blows people's mind because we always assume COVID was the problem for a lot of things this last year, but this actually started before COVID. Almost all of the grass seed in the world is produced in the Pacific Northwest. And in 2019 and 2018 and in 2020 a little bit, the Pacific Northwest was having an unprecedented drought, and they had the biggest wildfires they have had in recent history. And the wildfires burned up a lot of the production fields in the Pacific Northwest. So all of a sudden you have the availability has become very limited, right, because of what was lost in all of that. And then COVID happened, right? And like when COVID came around and everybody went home, everybody looked around their houses and thought, I'm pretty bored. What can I do around here? So they started doing house projects and lawn projects. So all of a sudden, what was available on the market for grass seed became impossible to get, right? And when you have low inventory, what happens? Prices skyrocket, right? And so I am here today to tell you there is so much good news in the world today because seed availability has recovered. And we are very grateful for that. You will see that in the pricing of what is happening right now, probably here and in other places. We are so grateful that we can get our hands on things. We were concerned about even having seed that we would use for production. Like that's how bad it was, right? We were buying very aggressively and stockpiling things because we need to be able to produce the thing that keeps the lights on, right? So anyway, we have out here 3 types of grass seed. We have master blend that matches the sod, 100% Kentucky bluegrass. We have a blend called New Lawn, which is a blend between Kentucky bluegrass, perennial rye, and finer fescues. And then we also have a dense shade mix as well that can go down to about 2 hours of direct sunlight a day for those of us who have shady yards. Most of us don't anymore post derecho. I know this is like a weird comment to make, but before the derecho, we had pretty steady sales of the dense shade seed mix, and post derecho, I can tell you exactly when the derecho happened if I just look at the dense shade seed sales. So anyway, all right, let's move on. Let's talk about fertilizer. A lot of you in the room use our fertilizer products. If you already use our fertilizer products, please raise your hand. Yay! Oh, that's so good. You want to know what I love about our fertilizer products is that everyone would know if they didn't work, right? Because they advertise themselves, right? If they're obviously, if you put something down and nothing happens, you're not going to try to use it again, right? And your neighbors are not going to ask you what you're doing in your yard. Our feeding programs here are very, very, very unique. And the reason why is because of that guy back there. My dad, for those of you who don't know, he obviously grew up on the sod farm, but then for about 7 years in the 80s, he strayed from the path. And he worked for a company you've never heard of called Scott's. And when he went to work for Scott's, his job was to go to golf courses all throughout the Midwest and to take soil samples and to build custom feeding programs for all of the superintendents for these golf courses to help them fix the problems that they were having, right? So for those 7 years, that's all he did. He traveled around, he did all these soil samples, and he would build these programs and say, this is what you need to do to make this golf course look beautiful, right? Then my grandmother decided she was ready to retire. Dad comes back, Dad and Mom buy the farm and everything like that. And all of our neighbors are going, hey, Mike, what should I put on my yard to feed my yard? And being a Scott's guy, he wanted to say, well, the Scott's 4-step program, right? But in the back of his head, he's like, not the Scott's 4-step program, because he knows from his experience now that you really need data to feed well, right? You need to think about the soil types that you're trying to feed. You need to think about the climate where you are, right? It's different times of year for different products for them to be effective. You need to think about the species you're trying to grow. And so way back when, he put together something that I would call just kind of like 4-step program 1.0 for bluegrass, which was kind of a generic thing where he's like, this is what I think people should do that'll be more in tune with Eastern Iowa and what we have here. And it was very successful right out of the gates. But then we took it one step further because why wouldn't we? We love data. And people started to bring us soil samples like this one that I got this morning. I love it when people show up with a bag of dirt for me. Like this is great. We started to get soil samples from people, and what we did is we started collecting that data over time. And so now we have spreadsheets and spreadsheets and spreadsheets and spreadsheets, and we have created an aggregate from all of that data, and we have honed this 4-step program to be something that is very specific to where we are here in Eastern Iowa. That is why you see results, and it's something we feel very strongly about. So a couple of things about fertilizer really quickly. First off, depending on who you ask, there are 16, 17, give or take, essential nutrients for plants to thrive and survive. The 3 big ones are going to be these right here. Can anyone tell me what N stands for? Nitrogen. P? That's the tricky one. Phosphorus, yes. And K is that tricky potassium. Yeah, that's right. I know everybody does it. Don't worry. It always happens. These are the three heavy hitters, right? N, P, K. And then you've got the secondary nutrients. We've got calcium up here. We've got sulfur. We've got magnesium. And then micronutrients all kind of floating around the outside here. All of these things work in balance, right? So if you overdo it with one, you will actually potentially harm one of the other ones. So it's always this balancing act of making sure that we have things the way that they need to be. There are a couple of things that I like to tell people about fertilizers when we're doing all of this. We collectively as a society in the United States need to have a moment to talk about vocabulary. The first is right up here. Fertilizer does not equal chemicals. Let me repeat this. Fertilizer does not equal chemicals. Those are two different words. They have two different meanings, two different implications. Fertilizer is literally anything that would feed a plant, essentially. So, sorry to be crass, poop is a fertilizer, right? No one would say that poop is a chemical, right? But poop is a fertilizer, right? Anything that would break down and feed a plant would be considered a fertilizer, right? Compost is technically a fertilizer, right? Like the clippings of your grass when you mow them, they break down, and technically speaking, you could say that they are a fertilizer. They are not chemicals. Chemicals is something that might be added to fertilizer to serve a function. So for example, a pre-emergent is an example of a chemical that has been added to a fertilizer product, right? Are we clear on this? Okay, so if there is anyone in this room who would like to feed their yard but not put chemicals on their yard, we can help you. There are fertilizer products that are available that are chemical-free that are very effective, okay? I just need to separate these two things, right? Other common chemical usages that people would use, I always tell people you have two choices really when you're taking care of your lawn. You have the I would like to just use food method, or I'm okay with better living through chemistry method, right? So on the chemical side, you would have pre-emergence. You would, for example, for weeds, we have the one that we have here would stop essentially 42 different weed species from germinating. It would also stop grass seed from germinating. So be cautious. If you're going to put that down, you cannot put seed down. So log that away. Grub control would be an example of a chemical, and a weed and feed. A herbicide is an example of a chemical. Okay. I already told you how we developed the program. Yes, we have chemical-free options. If you look up here, 1313, this is a starter fertilizer that is chemical-free. 1648 with sulfur and micronutrient package. This is chemical-free. Gypsum down here and lime down here. We would never tell you to put lime on your yard without a soil sample. If you are a person here who believes that your yard should be limed every year, but you've never done a soil sample, please stop. You don't have to raise your hand, just stop. And you can bring me a soil sample and we'll talk about what we can do next, right? Is your program pollinator friendly? If you are using the chemical side of this, is it pollinator friendly? Yes, it is. You can see right up here, this product right here, this is one of the step 2 products we carry. This one, Dimension, is the crabgrass preventer. Acelepryn is the only insecticide currently that the EPA has listed as pollinator friendly. And we intentionally carry that product here because it's something we feel good about, okay? So just keep that in mind. Is it dog safe? Yes. Yes, it is. If you want to be very cautious, you can do the chemical-free approach, just the food approach if you want to be exceptionally cautious. All of the products that we carry here are labeled as safe for people and pets. But whenever there's a chemical component, the bag will say it and we will say it too, we still recommend staying off the yard for 24 hours just in case, right? It's just, yes. But there's a lot of research on it. We follow it. We're very intentional with what we have here. And yes, the answer is yes. How do I know how much I put on my lawn? Who knows the answer to this question? Measure your yard. Yes, yes. Literally every person in this room who has ever talked to us on the phone has probably heard us say, well, how big is your yard? Do you know the measurement of your yard? What is the square footage of your yard? We ask that question probably 27 times a day, and there's a reason why. Because we can tell you exactly how many pounds of product you need to put down in your yard for the square footage you need to cover. That is how you do that correctly. Here's a hypothetical question. I've been fertilizing and I get to the end of my yard and I know I should use a bag and a half of product, but I only have a half a bag left. I'll just put the rest down. Should we do that? No. What do we call that? The moron approach. Yeah, yes. Don't do that. There is a reason why we tell you to stop, right? Just wrap it up, keep it dry. It will be good next year. And you're paying yourself forward next year. That's that much less product you have to buy next year, right? Okay, cold blend versus hot blend. This is a big deal. The 1313 that you see up here and the 1648 with sulfur and micronutrients, those are hot blended. They're homogenized. And the reason why that's important is because every one of those pearls, every one of those little granules that's in there has identical nutrient value. If it were a cold blend, right here, and the giveaway for that is if you've ever opened up a bag of fertilizer and there are 3 different colors in there, that's because each of those colors is a different nutrient. Some of them are nitrogen, some of them are phosphorus, some of them are potassium. And if you think about that, you have no control over that when you're spreading across your yard. So you might get a whole bunch of some in one place and a whole bunch of others in the other place. And generally when you're using the 3 big ones, N, P, K, it's not that big of a deal, but there will be some variation in growth and things like that. But when you're dealing with secondary and micronutrients, can you imagine if you had one little pearl of boron in that bag and then you're going along and it just shoots out over there? Like the rest of the yard's not getting any boron, right? And so that is why we carry hot blended fertilizer for these ones, the 1313 and this one right here with the micronutrient package, because it does make a difference. It gives you a nice even feeding and it'll give you even growth on the other side of it, okay? We have the 2 different feeding programs here. This one up here is the one that has grub preventer in it. That acelepryn is grub preventer, and you'll notice that that goes down as a combination in our step 2 product. The one down here does not have grub preventer in it. That is definitely, those are the 2 biggest variations of our program that people ask for. You'll notice that we don't have any feedings scheduled from basically May until August. That's because Kentucky bluegrass does not like to be fed in the summer. If you are the kind of person that likes to fertilize your yard in the summer, stop. Right? You really, really need to feed your lawn when it is less than 85 degrees outside, and good luck finding that in July in Iowa, right? So we intentionally designed this so that we're just avoiding summer altogether, right? Kentucky bluegrass as a species does not like to be stressed when it's hot outside. And I should also say, Kentucky bluegrass is a cold season grass. And sometimes people will ask us if we'll ever switch to like growing tall fescue, for example, which is a warm season grass, because things are getting warmer, right? And like we've thought about it. Don't get me wrong. This is a conversation we've had, but we won't make that change, at least for the foreseeable future. And here is why. Cool season grasses can handle really cold winter temperatures. And guess what warm season grasses can't handle? And tall fescue, for example, does not recover from that kind of damage the way that Kentucky bluegrass can. Kentucky bluegrass spreads 2 ways. You can do seed, and then it also spreads by rhizomes, like strawberries do. So if it's damaged, if you give it food, it'll spread and fill itself back in. Tall fescue can't do that. It does not have runners. It will not be able to fill itself back in. So someone would always have to be out there overseeding again and all of that stuff pretty much every spring. And that is just not helpful, right, when you're trying to also control for weeds, right? So Kentucky bluegrass, at least for now in Iowa, we feel is still the way to go, right? Soil sampling. I want to talk for just a second about when we get these soil samples from people, you could, of course, still potentially, the right answer would be our regular programs, but we would use that information to build a custom program for you where we were telling you exactly what you put down, and it might be different than these other programs that we have. If you have questions about that, let me know. State of the Union on fertilizer. Many of you will have noticed fertilizer prices were crazy the last couple of years. That was for a couple of big reasons, but in this particular case, it really was because of COVID and because of fuel prices. Oh my goodness. And also, this always throws people for a loop, drought. Does anyone remember what happened on the Mississippi River last year? Yeah. Yeah, it dried up, right? And barges were stuck, right? And how do we move a lot of fertilizer around the United States? Yeah, I know. So for farmers in general, we're just like, man, like, I mean, it was just like we can't have any nice things anymore. Like we can't get our fertilizer over the roads. We can't get it up the river. I mean, like it was just nuts. Yeah, it's been crazy. The good news, again, to let you have good news for all of this, is that it really does feel like a lot of these pressures have alleviated. Prices are starting to trickle down, like to come down in the fertilizer markets, which feels good. It's not where it was pre-COVID yet, but it's moving the right direction. So fingers crossed, we're moving in a good direction. And I should also say, the biggest, without a doubt, influence over fertilizer prices the last couple years is something that's not even happening in the United States. Does anyone know what it is? The war, yeah, yep. So when Russia invaded the Ukraine, right, obviously tensions between the United States and Russia dissolved a bit, right? Russia, people don't necessarily realize this, so Russia and China are two of the largest exporters for nitrogen and potassium in the entire world. And neither of them are particularly happy with us right now, right? And so when that happens, all kinds of things happen on a much higher level than any of us can control in this room, right? So there are many, many reasons why fertilizer prices are nasty, but they are moving in the right direction, and that is good for all of us sitting here today. So I'm done. This is the last you have to hear from me for a while. My dad is going to come up here, and he is going to talk to you about the sod that we grow and how we do that. Please welcome my dad, Mike.
We've got a couple of examples of what we do out in the field that if you were here during the season, you get a chance to see it in person. We'll show you. This, I was talking to a few of you before we started. This machine was actually built in about 1976. The company went out of business shortly after that. This is a current video of this. This machine back in those days was designed to cut and stack sod all by itself while you sat in the cab with the air conditioning on. It was very unique. We bought this in '96. It didn't run. It was completely rusty, and we figured out how to get it working without being able to call a company that built it. This is our pallet, the way we cut all of our pallets, and if we can't even buy a new one of these today. There's no company making anything quite like this today. The other way we cut sod is the big rolls. And the landscapers really like this. This saves a lot of labor for them. We have 3 of these machines. This one happens to be 2 people operating it, but we also have one of these that you cut with 1 person as well, and it does everything itself automatically. This is about 80% of the way we cut sod, and the pallets are about 20% of the way. When they get to the job site, they have machines that roll it back out, so it takes a lot of the labor out for them as well. And that's how that works. So we have the sod in the flats are 20 by 40 inches, and there's 450 square feet on a pallet. We can cut less than that, but we normally would have full pallets about 450 square feet. The rolls are 40 inches wide and 90 feet long. A big roll is going to weigh approximately 1,000 pounds. If you get a pallet of sod, a full pallet of sod from us, that's going to be about 1,500 pounds, but it easily fits in most average pickups, 4-wheel drive pickups. Sarah mentioned earlier the ordering process. We will put your name on the list. You tell us when you would like to pick it up or when you would like it delivered, and we will cut that 2 hours or less before you get here so it's nice and fresh. We recommend that you do prepare the ground before you get the sod so you can get the sod down quickly. It will transplant the best that way. The preparation is probably, you can do yourself a lot of good if you can loosen that soil up. It depends on the job you're doing. If you're repairing something, you can work it up with a shovel. If it's a new home construction, we see a tremendous amount of compaction at the new home sites, and that's something that is going to make it harder for the lawn to reestablish itself at your site. So if you can get that rototilled up and loosened up, that would be much better than having to deal with it with an aerifier afterwards. Are lawns good or bad? This is really becoming quite an issue. You may have noticed there was an article in the New York Times that you need to kill your yard before your yard kills you. That was an actual article just in the last few months. Here's a quick Google search. The top ones are lawns are colonialism, lawns are bad, lawns are a waste, lawns are us, lawns are stupid, lawns are useless, lawns are ecological disaster, and different types of grass lawns and how to maintain a grass lawn is down at the bottom. So there's a lot of misconceptions about a lawn. I think we'll cover a few of these here. First thing, we have to remember that grass has the ability to give off oxygen while it takes in carbon dioxide. So it's going to sequester carbon. That's its natural process. The process with grass, for example, right now our lawns are starting to green up, so we have oxygen being produced right now by grass. Even before the trees leave out, the grass is doing its job as we come out of winter. Secondly, if we look at the surface temperature of a lawn on an average day where we have about 75 degree temperatures, if we look at what the asphalt reading would be, it'll be over 100 degrees, so the reflected heat is a big benefit coming from a lawn. And artificial turf, they have seen temperatures 50 to 60 degrees hotter than the air temperature. So grass has a natural cooling ability. Also, when we have a lawn, we have the ability to absorb water in a rain event. So stormwater reduction is a big benefit. Also recharging your groundwater, where when you have artificial turf, of course that's sealed off and nothing is absorbed at that level. And landscaping, if they have filter fabric, rock, and mulch, things like that, it doesn't take in the water as quickly or efficiently as what a lawn would. These are some of the things that are important that we talk about here with the tours and so on and so forth. Reduced runoff, air quality, heat island effects. This is Chicago. This is the lake, of course, but as you can see, when you get closer and denser with more hard surfaced areas and buildings and things like that, the air temperatures rise. Or if you move out away from the downtown area, you see where the temperature is cool, where you have more lawns or you have farm fields. So you reduce heat island effect if you can have some green. Muddy paws, that's a big one this time of year, people that have moved into a new house and the yard hasn't been finished yet. Property values, the Realtors Association recently said that the value on a piece of property that is well maintained, landscaped, would be 15% more valuable than without a well-maintained lawn and landscape. Clean and conserve water. Slopes, if you had a job that had a lot of hills and things like that, you could try seeding. Good luck. Flat is more desirable, and if it is sloped, sod is a quick solution to that problem. Safer playing surfaces, we'll talk about that in a minute, and just general recreation. And here's some recent information from the NFL. Currently, half of the teams are playing on artificial turf, and the players sustain 28% more non-contact lower body injuries on artificial turf, 32% more knee injuries, and 69% more foot and ankle injuries than a natural grass field. Here's the information on the temperatures, 60 degrees hotter on the artificial turf fields that are not in a dome, of course. If they're in a dome, they're air conditioned. And 90% of the NFL players, especially the Players Association, believe that artificial turf will shorten their careers, and there's been a big push in the last season for natural grass fields to be established. Artificial turf cannot be recycled, so right now it's estimated 330 million pounds of waste from artificial turf is going to landfills a year. Artificial turf does not create oxygen, it does not sequester carbon dioxide, filter water, or cool the environment. And the World Cup, FIFA, the World Cup, has banned artificial turf for the World Cup games. All the fields that are played on have to be natural grass. And the U.S. women's soccer has banned the artificial turf fields for all teams. That was not the way it was with the Women's World Cup previously, and I think they sued and won that if the men could play on artificial or natural turf fields, the women should be allowed to do it too, for the reasons that we've stated before, for injuries. This is really interesting. This was done at Texas A&M University. What we have here is a natural grass field on the left, artificial field on the right. The athletes were all wearing sensors while they were playing, and they monitored the speed at which they were playing on the fields. While there's no difference in the top speed of an athlete, so they can run at top speed exactly equal, whether it's a natural grass field or an artificial field. Because of the way the ball plays on an artificial field, the speed of the game, or the amount of time the player spent running at top speed, was almost 61% greater than on a natural grass field. And you can see the brighter colors and how much more of it there is on the field as the game was played versus the natural grass field. So as far as exhaustion, and of course, substitutions and things like that they have to do, natural grass field is more desirable as far as the players are concerned. 4 out of the 5 food producing crops in the world are grasses, so we're not dealing with something that's exotic. They're very common around, especially in our part of the world, but around the whole world, how we farm. What we recommend you do is what we do all the time. We do grid sampling, which we have 400 plus acres here. We do grid sampling every 4 years, and we sample our farm in 2.5 acre grids. So we have 70 samples per field that we'll put into a spreadsheet and crunch the numbers. And then every year in between, we do spot sampling to see how we're doing. And with that information, we'll put this into some software that is actually from Ames, Iowa, from Ag Leader, which is our GPS company that we use for their hardware. We use their software. And this is a graph of this field. This is where we are right now. This is the building site. And this is a graph of pH of our field. So anything in red would be under 6. Anything in yellow would be 6 to 6.5. And anything in green would be 6.5 and over. Question for the room: why would the goods area, why would everything in green be on the outer edges of the field, the west and the south edge of the field?
Road in the parking lot?
Yeah, absolutely. It used to be a gravel road. Prevailing winds would bring the dust off the gravel roads from the west and from the south. So we were getting free lime. And so when we are spreading lime on our field, we will skip these areas. The tractor knows where we are with the GPS. The spreader will shut off in these areas that are already green. It'll put on a rate here on the yellow. It'll put on a double rate on the red automatically for us. This is one more test here. This is phosphorus. We have the green is ideal. Then we have different shades of less and less, red being deficient. You don't know this, but there used to be a farm site right here, and that was where the feedlots were. And ever since we bought this farm in 2006, before the flood, we started growing sod up here. And by doing the grid sampling, we have never put phosphorus on any of those green areas up there because there's so much native in the soil. So it's working smarter, saving us money, and feeding the turf the way we should, because as Sarah said earlier, if you put on too much of one, it will mess with the availability of the other nutrients. So you can get plants starving for nutrients by putting on too much of something, which doesn't seem to make sense, but that's what happens. One thing that changed for us when we moved from Blair's Ferry Road to up here, Blair's Ferry Road, we had flooding issues. Up here, if you check your forecast for today and they say it's going to be 10-mile-an-hour winds, just double it up here. So what we've gotten into for a couple of reasons. One of them at first was we started using cover crops. So down here at the bottom, this is actually the bluegrass germinating in the field, but we use oats in this particular picture as a cover crop. The bluegrass varieties are very, very slow to germinate, 21 to 28 days. And when they do germinate, they're very slow to develop top growth. They spend most of their energy on the roots. So we put oats in at the same time that we seed the bluegrass, and the oats will germinate in 5 days. And that will give us, it'll break up the wind, so we don't have to worry about wind erosion or dust blowing on the field, because we have to prepare a seed bed like you would prepare a garden, because the bluegrass seed is so tiny, and the way the planters work, you have to have a really fine textured soil. And so that is at risk for wind blowing until the grass germinates or a thunderstorm. So we've gotten into using cover crops very successfully. We use oats, we use wheat, we've used soybeans. Right now we're experimenting with buckwheat, which is like a soybean. It's a legume, and it comes along with our new location. Something, and it's also good for the fields as well too, to have that cover crop there. This is our one of our drone shots. Some data that we've been collecting on GPS farming. When we let the GPS steer the tractor, we don't have overlaps and we don't have skips, because the tractor and the GPS know exactly how wide the piece of equipment is behind us. And so we don't have wasted time in the field. We're very controlled, and we've had savings, for example, when we're tilling, of 18 hours of savings with GPS, spraying 17 and a half hours a year, harvesting 6 hours. It also generates, it comes over in the fuel savings of over 6%, because we're so efficient. We're not missing or overlapping. The other thing is it's much less stressful for the operators. They're not having to constantly look over their shoulder to see if the piece of equipment is doing what it's supposed to, not missing anything. They can sit back and they can monitor the whole operation without spending a lot of energy steering the tractor. On those big rolls of sod, there's a netting that's applied with the sod cutter. There's choices. We could save a lot of money. You could buy cheap netting to put on there. We always buy the biodegradable netting. If you've ever had a yard that was sodded with big rolls and you're trying to do some landscaping in the yard, you may have run into that black or that white plastic that's down there. With this stuff, this will break down over about 5 years in the soil. It'll rot away. Another thing that we do here that's GPS based as well, we do surface water shaping of the field. We don't flatten the field, but what we do is we make sure that the water, when the rain comes, that the water has as much time to stay where it falls so it can soak in before it runs off. So there's a company out of Australia, we survey our field, we send them a file, they put a plan together. We come back, we put that in the tractor, we hook up to our scraper equipment and go out, and it controls the scraper for us. And we drive over the field to maximize the ability for the water to stay and soak in best it can, no matter where we are in the field. Question we get a lot: when are you going to run out of topsoil? We'll probably not run out of topsoil before corn farmers will. We actually lose less soil off the field than traditional row crop. That was a study done at the University of Illinois, working with sod farms that have been 4 generations or 100 years on the same farm. And we lose less soil than row crop farming does. And the soil that we lose is actually going to your site. It's not going down a river or creek and ending up in the Gulf. The future, this is some stuff we're working on. Sarah mentioned or showed you pictures of our center pivot irrigation. They now have the ability to add GPS to that, and every sprinkler on the center pivot can be controlled by satellites to turn on and turn off exactly as we want it programmed, so we can adjust the water by the soil type. In this farm field here alone, there's 13 different soil types that we have to manage, and we could dial in exactly the amount of water wherever the center pivot is as it moves through the field for that type of soil. Also, when we harvest off the sod, we don't need to water the dirt where we already harvested the sod from the week before, so we can eliminate places as the irrigation comes around and conserve our water. So that's something we're looking at adding to our center pivot systems. Drones, we're using camera drones right now. This is some equipment that's coming out that can actually apply chemicals like herbicides and things like that with GPS technology. A secret project that we're working on that hopefully we'll tell you about in the future is with improving even more organic matter in our operation, and hopefully even using less fertilizer to produce the sod that we're doing now. This is going to be a big project for us this year. We're really looking forward to this. It's called regenerative agriculture. If you go online, go on Google or go on YouTube, there's a lot. It's a big movement around the world right now with farmers. And there's some really interesting work that's being done. We've spent quite a bit of time. We've done some Zoom meetings with Dr. David Johnson from University of New Mexico. He hasn't worked with sod farms, but he's working with us. So we're going to be having some information about that as we go forward.
Yep. You'll have to come back next year to find out if it worked.
Yeah. Questions? All right, I think you're back up.
Yeah, here we go. I think, let's take a 5-minute break to get more food and eat all of the leftovers. And then when we come back, I will lead us through a discussion about how to best care for your yard over the course of an entire year with the two of these fine gentlemen. Thank you. See you in 5 minutes. We have 2 microphones here, so I'm just going to talk really loud. So I'm sorry to everybody who's in front of me here, because I will try not to spit as we do all of this. Mike here is obviously been doing this his whole life. And then Dr. Nick Christians, this is, what year is this for you?
44.
44, and is retiring from the faculty at Iowa State Turf Department this year. So we intentionally asked Nick, who's been a family friend for as long as I can remember, to come and do this with us, also because we wanted to honor his service to this industry. He has been a great resource for the turf industry for 44 years. So please welcome both of them. Yes. And so I fully admit, I made this thing. I jokingly call it the Stump the Chump Hour here that we're gonna do. And I'm basically gonna walk us through a year in the life of what a typical homeowner is going to expect and the kinds of questions we get in the office every day. So I'll let these two, they can kind of rock, paper, scissors or jump in for who's going to answer what. But we're going to go seasonally through the year. So we're going to start with spring. And first question we get, how can I help wake up my lawn?
I'm going to start here first with a test of sound. You can hear me okay, I'm assuming, and I'm wearing 2 microphones. So the one on the camera is working okay too? Okay, very good. We're going to make this very informal. If you've got a question anytime, stop us, and we'll make sure that, I'll try to make sure, and Mike too, that we repeat the question because it's going to go to the camera. So we'll be glad to take your questions anytime. So let me add a little bit to what she said earlier about grasses. The question we get a lot is why bluegrass? Okay, why Kentucky bluegrass? And I get that all the time. And for 44 years, I've been looking for something better than Kentucky bluegrass. And for 60 years before that, there were people like me that were looking for something better than Kentucky bluegrass. But right now there isn't anything. Kentucky bluegrass is clearly the best for this climatic zone, this kind of soil, this kind of region. If we were in Dallas, Texas, that wouldn't be true. That would probably be Bermuda grass down there. But for our location, there is just nothing better in Kentucky bluegrass. And it's not for a lack of looking. We're always testing other species and trying to come up with better grasses, but Kentucky bluegrass is still number 1. And then the other thing she mentioned was the difference among Kentucky bluegrass cultivars, and that is so true. She showed you pictures of some with brown seed heads, some with blue seed heads. When you go to a let's say a hardware store and you want to buy grass and they scoop it out of a trash can with a thing into a bag and stuff, that's going to be cheaper, okay? But there is no cheap bluegrass. There is no bargain in bluegrass. You got to get the best varieties available because there's so much difference. Some of these are not going to function well at all. The others are, and the ones that function well, there's not a lot of that. So you never see a bargain on Kentucky bluegrass. You're going to pay top dollar for Kentucky bluegrass, but it's actually a very small part of the establishment process. So get the best bluegrasses you can possibly get.
All right, how can I help my lawn wake up?
So one of the things that we find in the springtime of the year is that phosphorus, which is that middle number on your bag, is generally less available to the turf in the cold soil temperatures. So just that as a background, if you are someone on a new lawn, a new construction, maybe your house was just built in the last 4 or 5 years, more than likely the soil is not in the order that Mother Nature put it in. The topsoil might have been stripped off. The soil from the basement might have got spread over the top of the whole yard. And so chances are you're probably pretty deficient in phosphorus, and that will keep you from greening up quickly in the spring of the year. We do get that comment a lot with people, just as I mentioned, that had just recently sodded. They will call and they say, my yard is still dormant looking when my neighbors are out mowing. And that's a real quick indication that it might be a phosphorus deficiency. So think about that in the cold temperatures. But more importantly, I would recommend soil sampling to see if that is in fact the problem, because there could be a couple others.
You can go too early. We get the lawn care companies, I don't know if you've seen any out here, but we always see them in central Iowa about the 1st of March, you know, and then everybody calls up and says, am I falling behind? Do I need to do my lawn? No, you need to wait until until the soil temperatures start warming up and you start getting some growth. For pre-emergence herbicides, there's a definite timing factor there. You're going to get germination of crabgrass about the 1st of May. Is that pretty close here?
Crabgrass is more like the end of May.
End of May. Okay, so you're a little warmer.
Yeah, in our program, people would be starting step 1 usually about the 1st, 2nd week of April, and then you'd be doing your step 2 the end of April or early May.
For us, that's the pre-emerge.
And that would be the pre-emerge for us.
You can go too early. Pre-emerge has an efficacy period. It's only going to be good for so many weeks and days. And if you start too early, you may have to go back on and put in another application. So timing is important there. And mid-April is a pretty good timing for that. So don't just seeing the lawn care companies out there doesn't mean you need to be out.
All right. This next one here, I'm going to have people in the room try to identify stuff before these two respond to it. So here are some fun pictures to get you thinking. Name that damage. Snowplows, yeah, okay. Dr. Christians and Mike, do you have any recommendation on how you would recover from this kind of damage?
Yeah, I think I would probably rake it back out, and I would get GPS on that snowplow next time.
Could you potentially, here's a question, could you lay that back down?
Oh, absolutely. This would be like harvesting the sod that we did yesterday. The grass is dormant. There's no reason that grass can't re-root. You might, if we didn't get any more moisture, you may have to water it a little bit because its roots have been cut off, but you could lay that back out and use it again.
If there's no salt in there, that's a problem we run into, and I'm sure you do here too. In city environments, they put so much salt on the roads, and salt is deadly to grass. So if that's got a salt problem and this problem, pretty hard to recover from. You had a question a minute ago, yeah.
Yeah, I'm waking up the grass, mowing. The first mow, do you go really short? Do you just...
Oh, okay. His question is on the first mowing, do you go really short? No, you don't need to do that. Let it get started mowing. We generally don't like to remove more than about 1/3 of the tissue in that first mowing. So if you're going to mow at 2 inches, let it get up to about 3 and then mow it off. There are people that come out and just mow the brown stuff off and kind of scalp it, and that nah, that's going to help with appearance. It's not going to help the health of the grass very much.
I mowed my grass here at the office last week. Okay. We do that for a couple reasons, but just like you said, we're mowing the brown ends off. It does green the yard up. Yeah. We're kind of in that business of giving people an opportunity to see that spring is coming. Question back here.
You bag your first mowing to get rid of that dead stuff?
Can you bag your first mowing to get rid of the dead stuff? Yes, you could. We generally don't recommend catching clippings because, as Sarah said earlier, there's a lot of potassium in those clippings that will refeed your lawn. But that first time, if you wanted to, you could catch those clippings. The brown clippings, maybe use them for some compost because, again, there's a lot of nutrients in those leaves.
Yeah, and if you got a lot of leaves left from last year and stuff like that too, it's an appearance thing more than it is a biology thing. Did we have another question back there?
How can you repair salt damage?
How can you repair salt damage? Okay, that's an hour and a half talk, but salt, meaning sodium salt, which a lot of times it is sodium chloride. The sodium will adsorb to the soil particles, and that's a big problem. In that case, there's a chemical called gypsum that I think you guys handle. That gypsum is an important part of that because it will knock some of the sodium off the cation exchange sites on the soil. So that's a very complex issue, and it depends on what kind of salt and how much salt and that sort of thing. But often gypsum is the answer to that. And then in severe situations where we have so much salt that you're just not, bluegrass is relatively intolerant of salt. There is a grass called Fult's weeping alkali grass, Puccinelia, that you can get online. You guys wouldn't have that here, but if you can get that, that's very tolerant of sodium conditions. And sometimes they'll use that along these curb areas to get grass back in there.
You mentioned mowing to 2 inches. I mowed to 3 inches last fall and thought, maybe I hurt the grass.
Yeah, his question is about a 2-inch mowing height. That was just an example. If you, 1/3 would be, if it's 3 inches, you cut it back to 2. I do recommend a little bit higher mowing height. I keep mine at 3 to 3.5 bluegrass, and then I let it get up to about 4 and cut it back. So, yeah, it's real, but not more than about 1/3 of what you want to
Well, we've got a whole section on mowing, Denny. It's coming. Yeah. It's coming. All right. Can anyone name this damage? There's a big hint in there. Puppies. Yes. Dog damage. That is urine damage. How would you deal with urine damage?
Well, what we recommend here is that product we were just talking about, gypsum. That's going to help in a situation like this. Gypsum is, you really can't harm anything with gypsum in our situation, unless you were to pour it on and completely bury the grass. But you could use it if your pet favors a certain spot in the yard, you could make regular applications of gypsum to try and help that out. And also, then when you do have damage that you need to recover from, you would want to maybe use a starter fertilizer and push it along a little bit to fill back in. So those two things, but gypsum is number one, especially with urine.
The guy I learned from always had a comment about that. There isn't a real good chemical solution. Gypsum might help a little bit. Smaller dog or bigger yard is your only solution. So, yep.
Is there a difference between female urine than the male urine?
Is there a difference between female urine and male urine? The answer to that is no chemically. However, the female will do that. They'll come back to the same spot, whereas the male is going to do more damage to your trees and shrubs. So you've all seen this if you've had dogs, but the urine is the same. It's urea that's burning that. There's too much in it. There's a lot of urea in urine. And the female does tend to go back to the same spot more than the male. So there is a difference between species. Yep.
So we can spot apply gypsum as often as we want?
Pretty much. I would tell you, if that was my dog in my situation, I'd do that once a month there to try and help. It's not going to prevent it completely, but it does seem to help. And I have a female dog, mid-sizing, a border collie, and she tends to do that. And I focus on that area, and the yard usually looks pretty good. We can keep up with her.
If you tie them up, move them, like anything. I had a neighbor that always had them in the same place, and really, I get a kick out of that because this guy has got the dog sitting on the yard and says, "What is that, a disease?" And no, that's dog damage.
So for that situation, raking it out and aerating it and putting the gypsum on, is that gonna help it come back faster?
A little seed might help there too.
But yes, all those things are good for your yard. And not raking the dead material, not raking your good yard in general, but raking the dead material. Aerating is always recommended. We like that, always helps to get some oxygen down in the root system. That's a good practice. And some fertilizer, whether it be the gypsum or gypsum and some starter, would help to stimulate the grass to heal itself back up.
But if you got too big a dog or too many dogs on too small a lawn, there's nothing you're going to do that's going to fix that other than more room.
Can anyone identify this?
Mice under snow.
What's
Yeah.
that?
Yes, mice under snow. Yes, voles. Vole damage. Yes, and mice can leave similar damage also. Vole damage. Voles like to travel in that kind of in between, right in between the top of the soil and where the snow is. They make these little tunnels all winter long to keep them safe from critters that want to eat them. And when they're gone, you are left with this. It's a little bit of physical damage and a little bit of urine damage kind of mixed together. How would you address this?
This fixes itself really quick in my experience. Right now I can look out my window to the east and see that, okay? Because we had a lot of snow this year from Ames, and they tend to work underneath the snowbanks, and I can see exactly where those trails are, but that will recover really fast. Yeah, they don't get down to the crown, they just eat the surface.
Yep. That this was a question from someone who's here today. I can still see where the stumps and equipment were in my lawn after the derecho. What can I do to help these areas recover?
Well, one of the things we just mentioned, aerification is a big thing. We've got a lot of compaction that occurred with the cleanup from the derecho, the trees, the tree removal companies. You know, we had to have them. It's a necessary evil. The lawns were wet, probably when a lot of these trees were cleaned up, and that increases the compaction. So aerification would be a tremendous help. There's aerification and aerification. We're going to get to some slides on that. We'll talk about that in just a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm assuming they took the stump out here. You know, if it's wood underneath there, that can be a permanent problem. It's going to be there for a very long time.
Is there a certain depth you think you should have your stumps ground to? I know a lot of people only go about 4 inches. If you go deeper.
Okay, his question's a good one. How deep should you go to cut that stump out of there? I mean, 6 inches would be my kind of pat answer, but I don't know if that's going to work. It probably vary by species and so on. Usually, the stump branches off pretty quick into underground roots, and they'll cut that all out of there. That's the best thing. If they can cut that all out of there, put some topsoil back in, 4 to 6 inches should be sufficient. But.
Okay. Name this spring weed. We'll see how people do. Ready? Number 1, what is this? No, not crabgrass. I did this. This is a trick question. What is it?
Nope,
Some
not
people
watergrass.
call it watergrass, but
It's
what
not
is watergrass?
Early in the spring. Right?
Early. This is
yeah,
very
this is
early.
early before you'd see crabgrass. So, quack.
There you go. Ding, 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 right here.
Yeah, you should have prizes.
Yeah. Yep.
Bag of fertilizer.
Just throw in 50-pound bags. You get a bag. You get a
Yeah,
bag.
this is quackgrass, and unfortunately, this is a perennial. It is not going to go away with a pre-emergent herbicide application. It's not going to go away with mowing. It's not going to go away with weed and feed. It's going to go away with Roundup.
And that isn't even always going to get it. Quack is the hardest thing in the world.
Yeah, the more mature the quackgrass becomes in your yard, the harder it's going to be to kill because the roots are very extensive. And what happens when you apply Roundup to the leaves, it has to translocate all the way to the end of its root system. So the longer that quackgrass is left in the yard, the harder it's going to be to kill because the Roundup runs out of steam before it gets all the way to the end of the roots, and the roots then regenerate and it comes back with a vengeance. So I hate to say it, I'd love to say I've got a product that will get rid of it without hurting your bluegrass lawn. There's no such thing that it exists. It's Roundup, and the sooner the better.
Yep, no selective control. And back on that why bluegrass, and the why to bluegrass is it has an underground stem system called a rhizome, and that's why it recovers so well from damage. Quackgrass puts bluegrass to shame with a rhizome. It can have a rhizome. I've got some pictures that I don't have here today, but 3 feet of rhizome. And like he said, if the Roundup doesn't translocate through it, it's going to come back when you reseed, and there it is again. I have not found a good way to get rid of that.
I intentionally put this photo in first because people think crabgrass comes in the early spring, and it doesn't. That's why we try to get you to delay putting your crabgrass preventer down until May, if possible, because as Nick mentioned, there's an efficacy for how long that crabgrass preventer will be effective. If you went out today and put down your crabgrass preventer, crabgrass doesn't even germinate in this area until the heat of summer really is upon us. And so you've already wasted a couple of months of efficacy of your product at that point. And so this is often when somebody calls the office and says, I have crabgrass everywhere this time of year, I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. It's not possible. It is not possible. And so we'll have them send in photos, and it is almost always quack grass. Yes, Michael?
You gave me a safe secret formula for dealing with crabgrass.
Oh.
You remember it?
If I remember correctly, Michael, in your yard you had quite a lot of crabgrass pressure. And so what we had you do is put down a crabgrass preventer 2 times in a single year. We had you start it in the spring.
No,
Quackgrass. No, just Roundup. Yeah. Yeah. I know. Otherwise, I'm brilliant and I'm going to make a lot of money.
There are things that we recommend and you can try, but the success rate, and I've tried it in my own lawn. I've been in my house now, I think 18 years in my what I call my new house, and I've had patches of quackgrass that were there when I started, and I have been throwing everything at them, all the experimental compounds and treating with Roundup and trying to get it to come back. That quackgrass has beat me. It's still there.
Question?
No, I just was going to mention that I think it's important to mention too, a lot of people tell me, well, I just go out and pull it. Worst thing you can do.
Quack what you're right.
Yep.
Worst thing you can do.
Every rhizome that you break sends up another plant.
I should mention, this is my mom. So she knows what she's talking about too. So yeah, no, she is correct. It's like a hydra from mythology, right? You pull one and you'll get 7 more. So yeah, don't pull it.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah, all right.
Did you find it?
Hold it. Yes, I found it. I asked Sarah about this, and she heard about it, and she said that she's been trying it out here in the front yard. So this wasn't necessarily a you don't want.
It didn't work. It didn't work.
It didn't work. Yeah.
We did try
Yeah.
it. It did not work. Okay. Yep. I'm sorry. I promise. That's actually, hey, Michael, if it makes you feel better, this is my yard. So if it worked, I would have used it here. Yeah, yep.
What was that?
Is crabgrass worse during the summer, or does it slow down real?
Well, it's a cool season grass like Kentucky bluegrass, so it's going to go through that same cycle, and it's going to slow down some, but not to the extent bluegrass does. That's one in a drought year, the quackgrass gets a foothold, and that's what I'll see. If we get 2 or 3 drought years like we've had in central Iowa, the quackgrass will move out and it'll outcompete the bluegrass in non-irrigated areas. So it has an advantage in the summertime, but it is a cool season grass.
Yeah, it's more obvious this time of year when the lawn is still kind of sleepy and the quackgrass just shoots up and you're like, what is that? But in the summer, that color will change and the bluegrass and the quackgrass will be a little more even in their growth.
Yeah, brome grass will do that now too. Brome grass is just, it comes up really quick in the spring if you've got brome in there.
Mike,
Question
maybe,
in the back.
is there a better time of year if they are going to kill the quackgrass with Roundup? We always like to kill things when it's actively growing.
Right.
So summertime is not a great time to spray.
Right, we generally would try to use Roundup in this. The question was, when's the best time to try and use Roundup on quackgrass? And we would recommend the spring of the year when it's actively growing. If you can go back to your slide. Now, you could actually even get in, we've had people actually take Roundup on a sponge type device, if you will, because you can see how much taller it is than the lawn. And if you can get the wiper effect of the Roundup, that can work too. They actually sold wipers a long time ago for farm fields, for volunteer corn, and you filled the tube with Roundup and you drove over the top of the soybeans so it didn't touch the soybeans before we had Roundup ready. That same idea could be done here as long as the quackgrass is a lot taller than the bluegrass. you might be able to get rid of some of the quackgrass without killing the bluegrass right underneath it.
They have made those for lawns too, where you wipe over the top, but again, I've tried it and it just not successful.
Did it work? Okay, good.
We had a woman last year, I thought this was so clever. She retired a set of tongs from her kitchen, so she was throwing them away when she was done. And on each side, she affixed a sponge on each side, and she soaked the sponges in Roundup, and then went out and very lightly kind of grabbed at each of those tall plants. And I'm like, that is brilliant. Like, you're gonna be 100-air. Like, you need to patent this idea and sell it somewhere. Because right now Roundup has like a gel stick that looks like a deodorant stick, and that is not helpful because you don't have any back pressure to be able to keep the plant up. So yeah, the tongs method is good, but I would recommend throwing away the tongs when you're done. Don't use them on a salad. Yeah, yes.
Question, how long do you have to wait after using Roundup to sod, put sod back?
All right, that's an interesting question because it'll say on the label 10 to 12 days for translocation. It depends on the kind of species you're trying to get rid of. So if you have quackgrass? Oh, zoysia. Zoysia is another tough one. It has to translocate down into the rhizome, so you would want to wait a period of time, 10, 12 days, and you might even have to let it come back and reapply with quackgrass too. If you're trying to get rid of, say, ryegrass that doesn't have a rhizome on it, you can seed. I've actually seen people seed into it, then hit it with Roundup because the Roundup doesn't hurt the seed. But if it is a rhizomatous grass like zoysia or like quack, you're going to have to give it a time to translocate, or when you seed, you'll cut the rhizome and you won't get any, you'll kill the plant you touch, but all the others will come back.
In the interest of making it to the other seasons of the year, I am going to advance the slide. Oops, why did this reverse on me? That's so weird. Okay, this one, I'm just going to tell you the answer. This is Poa annua, and Dad or Nick, do you want to chime in on how you identify it and how you get rid of it?
Yeah, it puts a lot of seed on very quick. It's a lighter yellow, lighter green color than your lawn. Pre-emergent herbicides are the best, and you need to apply twice a year because this will germinate spring and fall. So if you are serious about getting rid of this, you have to keep a pre-emergent on that lawn all growing season because those little seeds will all germinate and start more plants. So that's kind of the basic 101 to fight off POA. There's no herbicide, again, for homeowners that they can apply that would selectively take out the POA without hurting the lawn.
I have an article that I wrote for Golf Course Management. This is a big problem in golf, not more so than lawns. Following 80 years of research on how to kill this species, and that goes back into the 90s, so it's been like more than that now, and we have failed, okay? We have not, just like quackgrass, we don't have a good answer for that one. You can get some knockback on it, but it's going to come back on you.
Yep.
Anybody know what this is?
This is usually the first weed to show up in people's yards in the spring.
Is this spurge?
No, close. This is knotweed. Knotweed. Spelled with a K, like tying a knot type knotweed. Yep, yep.
Pre-emergent herbicides will take care of this, but this would be the opposite of what we've been saying by waiting. Knotweed germinates in March, so you would have to have your pre-emergent, like what we sell Dimension is listed to control knotweed, but you would have to have it out there before it germinated for it to work. So if you were doing that and you had a problem, which back when I was with Scott's, that was an issue for golf courses because of cart paths and compaction, knotweed flourishes, they would apply very early and then come back and reapply their pre-emergent again for the summer annuals. It's kind of hard. You can't really get it with 2,4-D. You've got to use more aggressive herbicides, but you can treat it. You can spray it after it does come up. But the easiest would be a pre-emergent, applying it before it ever germinates in the first.
This one will fool you, and it'll look like a grass when it's coming up. And often the lawn care people will have customers call them and say, well, it's the middle of April and my crabgrass is coming up all over around the sidewalk. You don't even need to come out. But it's not crabgrass. It is this species And it looks like a grass when it first germinates, and then it grows like this, and you can tell the difference.
Can you pull this? Yeah.
But it's a sign of compaction too. You'll see it along the sidewalks and sports fields in the middle of it. So if you can alleviate the compaction with aeration, that'll help a lot.
But yes, you could pull it. There's no root system that'll regenerate, but you're not getting rid of the cause. The cause was compaction.
Yep. All right, summer questions. How should I behave differently with my lawn during the heat of summer? Yeah, stop mowing as much. Yes, please. Yeah.
Watch the temperatures when you're out mowing. If you're in the habit of mowing when you get home from work, and that's the high temperature of the day, look at your lawn. You may notice that the lawn is looking a little gray or not as lush green. That's telling you it's under heat stress. I would avoid mowing in the afternoons. You could switch to morning if your lawn needed to be mowed.
Stay away from fertilizer. At cool season grasses, you're going to do it spring and fall. If you had a warm season grass like zoysia, you mentioned zoysia. Did you have an old zoysia lawn that you're trying to replace?
No,
It just comes up as a patch? Yeah. If you were managing zoysia or Bermuda in the south, you would fertilize in the summer. We get a lot of confusion from people who live down south and then come up here, and they want to try to do everything that they do with Bermuda on bluegrass, and it's just the opposite. It doesn't work.
Summer weeds. I bet you know this one. Crabgrass. This one is not a trick question. This is crabgrass, and how do you identify it?
It grows in a crabby position.
It does.
Yeah.
You can see the seed head if you look real close, and the seed head's a dead giveaway. Finger grass. This is called digitaria in Latin. Digits are fingers, so whoever named that thought that the seed heads looked like fingers sticking up.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Is that the same as a water grass? Are those synonymous?
Okay, water grass is, I've had that question so many times over the years. There is no such thing as water grass. Okay, so people will call a wide variety of summer annuals, crabgrass, goosegrass, foxtail. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of these, barnyard grass. That's a collective term for things that are annuals that come up and you see them in midsummer like this. And the reason they show up in midsummer is these are warm season grasses. These are like Bermuda and zoysia, thrive in the mid part of the summer, whereas the bluegrass is struggling.
You know what this is?
Yeah, yellow nutsedge. This is another one when people tell me they have water grass. Oftentimes they have yellow nutsedge because it likes being in low-lying areas where there is more water present. Yes, and what's tricky about this is it's not actually a grass, and I'll let you two explain that.
Yeah, it's actually a sedge, which you think about the peat bogs, and a lot of the peat bogs were formed by sedges. It's actually a V-shaped leaf, and it has a very stiff mid-vein. It grows very quickly, but your pre-emergent herbicide, again, will not control this. This is, but they sell a sedge killer for yellow nutsedge. There's some bull sedges, there's some other ones that may show up in your yard, but it's just a little different chemistry and it'll take care of it. It's not a problem.
All grasses are two-ranked, meaning they come off, each leaf comes off 180 degrees from the last one, like corn. If you look at corn, they're coming off 180 degrees. That's a characteristic of grass. Sedges are three-ranked. They come off, they look like grass, but they have a triangular stem and they come off in three directions. That's always the dead giveaway on that.
Does this have a rhizome?
No.
No, but it's
a
got
bulb.
nutlets. Yellow nutsedge
Yeah.
has a structure called a corum on the root that is a reproductive structure. And that will form underground, and it can come back from that, like it does from a rhizome. And that's an important thing about the treatment. There's several chemicals you can use, but it'll say to repeat every 12 to 14 days. And the reason for that is the nutlet tends to dislodge from the root system. So even if you get a product that translocates, it doesn't kill that nutlet, and it'll come back from that. So when it comes back, you got to hit it again, 2-3 times.
And as I mentioned, it comes from the peat bogs and stuff like that, which contribute a lot to our black dirt, our topsoils, which are very advantageous. We'd like to have topsoil, but also we could be bringing a lot of the seed in. So don't be surprised if this shows up. It's easy to control. But it comes from that rich topsoil that we all want.
Yep. This one, people know this one.
So better to control it than to pull it on the sedge?
Pulling it won't deal with the seed that was left in the ground.
Although I do recommend pulling sometimes. I've done that. Let's say you've got a patch that's 3 feet wide in your lawn. You can bend over and pull that in 10 minutes, okay? It's easy to pull and it comes up good, but you're gonna get some coming back. But if you've got a small patch that's 3 feet wide, I'd say hand pull it. And be persistent at it. If you've got 10,000 of them, like I had a couple of years ago, then it's a chemical problem.
What's the chemical that's in sedge soil?
I'd have to look that up, or we can find out. I'm not familiar
The chemical
with it.
for sedge? The chemical for sedge, was that the question? Oh, there's one called Sedge Hammer, which obvious, it's not Sledgehammer, it's Sedge Hammer. Okay. And then there's another one called Dismiss.
I think Ortho also has one that you can get at hardware stores that is labeled for sedges. You just have to look for something that's labeled.
Ben, do you know?
Sulfentrazone.
Oh, sulfentrazone, that's the other one, correct. And you can get that like in Lowe's and places like that.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of looking for, because there's a million different trade names, but yeah, the actual chemical is the best for sedges. It sounds like it's
Right, there's 2 or 3 of them that will selectively take it out. It's a timing thing and it's persistence, and it's not like quackgrass where you're losing the battle. You can win the battle on sedge.
I do a lot of pulling though.
I like to pull them. I get small patches and I go out there in 5 minutes, you got them all pulled up.
It's kind of a relaxing activity.
Yep, Ben, you get an extra cookie for knowing that. And then, yes, Michael.
For the hard of hearing, when you mention the weeds, can you slow down and also even spell it?
Oh, okay.
Sure, yeah.
It's going by, one is that I thought you were talking about nutsedge, but then it sounded like you were talking about sedge.
No, sedge is the word. Yellow nut sedge is one of the species, and that's probably the most common here, I would think. That's our most common. But there are many other sedges. There's books on sedges. S-E-D-G-E-S. Sedge. Sedges. Yeah, sedge. S-E-D-G-E. And there's many, many of them. If you look it up in the internet, you'll come up with purple nut sedge and yellow nut sedge, and there's a whole bunch of them. Yellow is the most common one right here.
It almost sounds like nutsedge, but there's no D in it.
There is a D. Oh, did I leave the D out? S-E-D-G-E? I think I might have left the D out. Sedge. Sedge.
Second syllable.
Yeah.
It's sedge, yes, but in nutsedge, is there a D in the second syllable?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, anyone know this one? Clover, yes. How do we deal with clover?
Herbicide spray is very effective. MCPP is the active ingredient you want to look at. On the flip side of that, though, if we're looking at pollinator-friendly lawns, we're starting to put clover back into lawns. So if that was the case, you'd want to avoid a product that had MCPP in it. If you wanted to get rid of, say, dandelions and creeping Charlie, you could pick a product that would not kill the clover in your yard. But I think micro clover is kind of becoming popular for lawns. Maybe if you watched This Old House, they actually did one of their projects in the last 3 years, I think, with a sod that had micro clover and bluegrass already in it. It may have had tall fescue too, but yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. Be a pollinator-friendly lawn.
Yeah, 2,4-D will not get that. 2,4-D is great on dandelion and plantain. That one will curl up and it'll come right back. So you do need to go to MCPP, or the best one is triclopyr. Triclopyr is another one of the combination herbicide products you can get.
Name this disease. I'm going to give you all a hint right now and tell you that there are some trick questions in this next section. Are you ready? Name this disease. Who knows what this is? Yes, that is not a disease. What is it?
Drop spreader.
Yeah, drop spreader with fertilizer. Somebody striped their yard with fertilizer, but we get calls about this. People think they have a disease. The giveaway, oops, I want to go back to that. If anything in your yard is in a straight line, it is not a disease, okay? If it is in a straight line, it means that you might have done something funny. Okay, and so yeah, just send us, you can always send us photos if you're curious, but straight lines are the giveaway. Mother Nature doesn't work in straight lines, right?
So often I've run into people that think that fertilizer is so soluble it leaches to everything, and they think they can put it out like that, and the first rain it's going to spread out. That is a good indication of how little fertilizers move. They don't move an inch from where you put them.
Okay, here's a little bit about feeding. We already have talked about this. What will soil sampling teach me? Obviously, it helps us to know exactly what is there, what is not there. This next one, feeding. I want to talk about the picture on the right really quickly. What is wrong in that photo? Yeah, exactly.
That's on the driveway. That's what's wrong with fertilizer. It's not putting it on the yard, it's putting it someplace where it shouldn't be.
Right. Yep.
So, clean it up, don't leave it there. Leaf blower, broom, put it back on the lawn where it'll do some good so we don't get it down the storm sewers and into our water supplies.
Yeah, on the lawn, it's not going to, I mean, even on a slope, it's not going to move off into the sanitary sewer. But on concrete and asphalt, it goes right into the sewer system.
Yep. First question, we kind of have addressed this. How much product do I put down?
How big's your yard?
Yep, exactly. Next, when should I put down preventers and what about curatives?
Well, preventers, I think we've already covered. Curatives would be when the weeds are actively growing. That's number one. So the time of the year, if you've had frost, if you've not had frost, if you're under drought stress, things like that. Also the time of the year that the weed is going to be there. So like we talked about, this time of the year is not crabgrass. If it's August, it's probably crabgrass. So we have a different recommendation than chemical depending on the time of the year.
Next question, when should I not put down product? Dr. Christian's already mentioned in the heat of summer. If it is over 85 degrees, stay off your yard.
Also, when the soil is frozen. No,
Yes.
Seriously, we have people that want to fertilize, and in February we're talking to people and they're like, how soon can I go out? Well, you can go out, but the soil has to be thawed out, because again, you could end up with a situation like spreading it on your driveway, because if you got a big rain, which we've gotten while the ground is frozen, all that fertilizer is going to wash right off the lawn down into the storm sewer.
Yep. How do I avoid streaking? That previous photo, how do I avoid doing that?
Don't use a drop spreader anymore. What we like to tell people is mow first. You'll have your mower stripes. If you're using a broadcast spreader, you'll get a rough idea of how many stripes or mower stripes your spreader will cover. And you can use those stripes to guide you as you spread across the yard. It's just a little tip. It does work. And when you use a broadcast spreader, you do want to overlap 10%. So if it's spreading 10 foot wide, you're going to move over 9 feet, and you can figure out from your mower stripes approximately 9 feet. You do want a little overlap, because rotary spreaders don't spread 100% perfect and then stop. At the edges, they taper off, and so your rates drop out there, so you overlap 10%.
Yep. I have a whole book on this, mathematics for turfgrass maintenance, that you can get from Amazon or places like that. And it goes into all this. How do I calculate how much fertilizer I need on my lawn? That's all in there. And then the spreading, calibrating spreaders. It's a whole book on that subject.
Yep. Name this disease. This is a trick question. Drought, yes. And what are the happy patches there? Water. Yeah, close to where the irrigation heads are, right? So this is a faulty irrigation system that we're seeing here, right? That is not a disease. Well, name this disease. Drought. Still drought, faulty irrigation system. Dad, do you want to share this?
Yeah, this is actually a customer of ours. This had been sodded all around the whole property. And you can see in the back, the grass is doing fine, but the phone call was, your sod is dying. And I said, I'll be right there. I literally was. It was on the south side of town. I went down there. I took my soil probe. And I'm kind of a big guy. I couldn't get this 1 inch into the ground. The ground was obviously so dried out. This was a complete automatic wireless irrigation system. It was top-notch irrigation system that was put in. And the system was telling the groundskeeper that it was working. And so he thought it was a disease. There was something wrong with the sod, because on his phone the irrigation was working. And I was like, I think I found the problem. And go ahead, next slide. This is 2 weeks later. I told him the lawn would be fine. We set up a different watering program for the lawn. We irrigated it during the heat of the day instead of at night to get it to recover from the drought. This is just 2 weeks later. They were happy. I was happy. We didn't have to send them a truckload of sod.
You must have just caught it, because that not always going to recover that well.
So now we're going to talk about watering strategies. That's a great segue. What's wrong with this picture? Watering when it's raining. Watering when it's raining. What should you have installed on your irrigation system at home so this doesn't happen? A rain sensor. If you don't have it, it is worth it. Don't do this. Don't be this person, right? There was a question over here. I'm sorry, maybe.
We had a guy back, gentleman right here.
I was gonna, you're on watering. I was gonna ask for watering.
Oh, yeah, great. Yep. Okay, very good. Yeah, don't water when it's raining. Save yourself some money, right? How often should I water?
Depends on the weather.
Depends on all sorts of factors.
All sorts
Soil
of factors.
Type, weather.
I think,
and
are we talking, is this the summer sequence we're in right now? So yeah, you know, ideally once a week would be ideal. Do you have to? No. You could water once every 3 weeks would be fine. If we get in a severe drought with really high temperatures, I do recommend some water at least at 3 to 4 weeks to keep the crowns hydrated. You know we're going to have a lot of browning, we're going to have some thinning going on, but if we can keep the crowns hydrated, when the weather changes, the lawn's going to recover. We can go so long, back in the 80s when we had those back-to-back severe droughts, there was watering bans in Cedar Rapids, there was articles in the paper, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. I can tell you the next year after the rain started back up again, we sold a tremendous amount of sod to lawns that were dead. Completely dead. They never came back because we went so long. We went 6, 7, 8 weeks without a drop of rain and high temperatures. And if there were people that had done some light watering just to keep the crowns hydrated, those lawns came back fine. So it's something to think about. It really depends on several factors and conditions.
think deeply and infrequently. You don't want to turn it on a few minutes every day and keep the surface wet. You want to give it a good shot, and perfectly you would water to the bottom of the root system so that you're not putting excess water on it, but you want to get to the bottom of the root system and then let it go back in stress for a few days. So,
how long would you say then?
How long should you water, or how long should you wait?
Saying once a week, but the length of time is a difference too.
Now you're talking about how long to run the irrigation head or how long to wait? How long to run the, oh yeah, that's going to vary with the type of head spacing you have and the flow rate of the irrigation and that sort of thing. About an inch per week is the standard we use. So bluegrass in this climate with normal soil conditions is going to take about 1 inch of water per week.
So rain gauges, you know, that we can't tell you because, I mean, if you had a hose and a sprinkler, how big a pattern does that one sprinkler cover? So we really just need to go measure, and then you can determine minutes on your irrigation system or how long before you're going to move that hose.
Tuna cans. They're the best thing ever because they have a short little side, and they will help you. If you put some tuna cans out there, it'll tell you exactly how much water is hitting the surface wherever that particular head is. And that's a really helpful little tool. So if you're trying to calibrate your system, tuna cans are a great tool for that. And then the other question we get a lot is, what time of day should I be watering?
Well, ideally you'd water when the grass is naturally wet anyway, so that's at night when you already have dew formation. So you're not keeping the lawn wetter longer in a 24-hour period, because if that happens, you can start to develop some disease problems because it's wet too long. So if you can apply the water in the evening, that's ideal. That's different than starting a new lawn. If you're laying sod, we're going to tell you the exact opposite of that. You're going to water during the heat of the day. You're going to water short and infrequent. You're going to water 3 times. You're going to water at 10 o'clock, noon, and 2 o'clock. You're going to give it a light burst 3 times to keep the temperature down in the sod and keep it moist, because you've got a mature plant with no roots. The roots were cut off and left here at our farm. We're not trying to soak the ground super deep. We're trying to keep the plant happy and cool. So in the summertime, during the water during the heat of the day on new lawns, and just the opposite on existing lawns.
Yep. Name this disease. It's a hint. It's not a disease.
Your advice to water in the evening is contrary to what I've read. I've read to water early in the morning.
While the grass is still wet with dew. Yeah, as long as you're not adding hours to how long it is wet, I think is the key.
Okay, so it could be done early in the morning.
Yes, right. 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. The dew usually goes off by, say, 7 o'clock, so you could water 5, 6, and you're not adding hours of the day that the lawn is wet.
Now, look at golf courses. They can't water in the daytime because they're going to get the golfers wet. So they water at night, and it works. It might increase their disease activity a little bit, but there's really not a terrible time. The middle of the day, you get more evaporation, so now you're not getting the efficiency out of your water. So no really good answer to that.
I'm going to speed through some things here. This is not a disease. This is mower damage. This is an example of somebody who's out there in the summer. They mow every Sunday, and it's Sunday, so I'm going to be out there and mowing. You can see the straight lines from where the tires are moving, right? Well, he doesn't really mow in a straight line, but you can see where he's been going. He also took off a lot of top growth, so there's some thatch, or not thatch, but some scalping that's happening. You can see where the clippings have been smothering the grass that's beneath. This person was personally offended when I suggested that this might be something that he might have done himself, but the reality is that this is not a disease, right? So we need to be very, very careful about when we mow in the heat of summer. I'm going to buzz through a few of, sorry, why is this changing back and forth all the time? What is happening? Sorry, my thing is freaking out a little bit. There we go. And mowing, here again, mower stripes, right?
High temperature mowing, mowing
Yep.
when it's too hot.
Yep, how often should I sharpen my blades? You can see the photo on the right there is a good hint that your blades need to be sharpened when you have that fanning at the top of the grass. That means the grass is being torn rather than being cut by the blade, and that'll actually cause your lawn to dehydrate quicker. So you want to be able to, we tell people to sharpen your blades at least once a year, twice a year if possible would be great. And yeah, that'll help prevent
I've
that.
got a story about that. I had a guy that contacted me one time who it was obviously shredded and being cut with a dull mower. And I said, well, you need to sharpen your mower. He says, no, that's not it. I did that. Okay, so what did he do? With the older, cheaper mowers, you can turn the blade over and be mowing with the back side. So if that ever happens to you, check that out and make sure that it's the sharp side is what's doing the cutting.
Yep, quick reactions from the two of you for the rest of these questions. Should I bag my clippings? What height should I be mowing? And what direction do I mow? Does it matter?
So don't bag your clippings. What height? 3 to 4 inches. Direction with the sun. No, direction doesn't matter.
Well, unless you got heavy mowing equipment. And if you're compacting areas and you're seeing wheel tracks, I've got a pretty heavy John Deere mower that I've got to vary my mowing. I will vary my mowing pattern once in a while, or I will have tracks from the wheels.
Mowing. This is a screenshot from last year. The question was, is there a day this week I should mow? And the answer is no. If the weather forecast looks like this, stay off of your yard. It's going to be very, very unhappy. Question from someone in the room. The south and west slopes of my lawn always look so sad compared to the rest of it. What can I do about it?
Yeah, it's going to be taking more heat from the sun during the day, and also slopes are going to shed water, so it's going to be a place that you're going to want to try and manage your water better. It may be a situation that it may be a different type of grass. How old is that yard? The new varieties are much better at drought tolerance, and that south and west slopes get a lot more heat and they shed water, but the new varieties are much, much better at handling drought situations.
Yeah. There's lots of microclimates in lawns, and I've seen a number of cases where somebody will have me out and they've got a spot in the backyard that's maybe 15 feet wide and 10 feet long, that sort of thing. And what's happening is they've got a white house, 2-story white house. The sun comes down, beats on the house, reflects down on that spot, and you're getting sunlight directly on that spot, and it'll burn the spot out. So watch for that. But the south slope with the sun shining on it, that's harder to keep.
Name this disease for real this time. These are actual diseases this time, I promise. So,
Guesses?
Yep.
What was it?
Yeah, this is
Denlonitis.
summer patch, necrotic ring spot. This is dollar spot, pythium, and to address all of them, how would you deal with them, and should I spray a fungicide annually? I'll let you two respond to that.
Should I spray annually? Probably not, unless you've got a consistent disease problem. I have not put a fungicide on my lawn in 44 years, okay? So you can get by without it. If you're managing proper, watering properly, aerifying and things like that. However, you will run into fungi once in a while. Who had the brown patch? I was talking to somebody. Okay, you had the brown patch that was identified by the disease lab at Iowa State. There are situations like that where you can get a disease problem you need a fungicide for, but that's going to be the exception rather than the rule. But save your money. Don't be spending a lot of money on fungicide unless you really need it.
Think of it like taking an antibiotic when you're not really sick, right? You should only use a fungicide if you know for a fact you need to use a fungicide.
Very rare on lawns. Yeah, in the back there?
That first slide you had where you had like a dead patch, that big round, right there. I get that in my lawn about every summer, but I have a little green spot right in the center of it. My neighbor calls it frog eye.
That's called summer patch. That's a fungal disease.
Okay, I use 1313 on it in between times, it clears it right up.
It'll come back in the fall, but if it's coming back for you every year, there are systemic fungicides that you can get specifically for that disease. Look for summer patch on the label, and you got to put it down in the late spring before the disease develops. That's the critical part.
About every year for a couple of weeks, and I start fertilizing a little more, and it starts going.
Yeah, it'll come back for you in the fall, but people really get annoyed by it.
What do you use for that? What do you use for it?
Oh, okay. There's various fungicides that are labeled. You got to get the one specifically labeled for summer patch. So it's summer patch that you've got, and or necrotic ring spot in cooler weather. But there are fungicides that don't get it. There are fungicides that do. So make sure you're getting one that's got it on the label.
Might just speak to rust real quick. I know that's kind of a thing around here. I'm sure everybody's probably seen some rust at some point, maybe in their yard.
Yeah, rust is a disease that we get to deal with here because it's like being a teenager again. Young grass plants are very susceptible to getting rust. Once they mature, their resistance comes up in the plant, and we don't really see a lot of problems with it. But out here, we can be mowing out here, and like that picture we had with the white smoke look like behind the mower, we'll have clouds of orange behind the mower. So we do use a fungicide to treat that because it stops the plant from developing while the rust is infecting the plant. It can thin out the turf. Generally, I don't think I would call it a killer, but as the lawn matures, so if you've got a new lawn, if you're a new homeowner and your lawn has just been sodded, you could see a little more rust for the first couple of years, and after that, it should not be so much of a problem with these new varieties. Generally, it's when the grass slows down. So if you're in a dry period or if you've run out of food, rust will be more of a problem because the grass, well fed and well watered, will grow out of it. Yeah, right there.
Is that what would be on your yellow powder on your shoes if you're walking through somebody's yard?
Yep, exactly.
And that's treated with a fungicide?
You can treat it with the fungicide, exactly, but you can also treat it with fertilizer and water. If you can get the lawn growing again, it'll grow out of it.
Fungicides are very expensive, and probably by the time you get around to it, it's going away anyway. So I'd let that one ride.
So as long as that's going to happen every year if you don't keep up with water and fertilizer.
How old is the yard?
Honestly, it's not my yard. It's some clients of mine that I go to their yards every week and I walk to the yards. I get it on my shoes.
Yeah, it's depending on the varieties. If it's a real old yard and they're very susceptible to rust, then that's never going to go away. But the new varieties that we're picking are very resistant to it. So it's a young development problem, but as the yard gets about 3 or 4 years old, it should pretty much be gone.
Mike, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot and that you'll remember this circumstance Can you address 409 disease?
Oh, yes, we can. I think I know what you're talking about. We're talking about actually being on a golf green. Is that what you're,
No, that Mark Fleming's 409 disease.
You're going to tell me.
Well, he had a patch in his yard that had died, and he went, and it happened to be in the shape of his car mats.
Oh.
And his wife had used 409 to clean the car mats. So think about what you may have done in that spot.
We actually, when I was working for Scott's, you'd go on golf course greens in the summertime, and you would see a spot that looked like that summer patch that we had up here, but there'd be 2 feet footprints in the middle of it that were bright green. And it's where they stood with a can of off mosquito repellent, and they sprayed their legs down while they were waiting for their turn to putt. And that burned the green, except where their feet were. And it's like, well, that's a weird looking disease with footprints in it.
And I do want to address really quickly, it is 11 o'clock. If people need to leave, you're welcome to go. Thank you for coming, for those of you who need to go. Tim, do we have someone over who can help load? Yep, we'll make sure we've got someone over there for those of you who are picking up products. So if you do need to jet, you can. We've got probably 10 to 15 minutes left of material for those of you who would like to stay. So just so you're all informed. Okay, very good. Bugs and critters. Grubs, yes, yes. And you can see from this photo, I do want to say really quickly that grubs are normal. It is okay to have grubs in your yard in the same way that it is okay to have earthworms in your yard. Just because you have some grubs does not mean you need to go out there and nuke them from orbit, right? What the problem is, you can see here, here's a tiny little pencil. The problem is when you get a lot of them in a very small area. They usually will tell you that the threshold is about 10 per square foot, and when that happens, you'll start to see damage on the surface area. And if that is to happen, we do carry a product here that would kill those grubs in that particular spot, or obviously a grub preventer should prevent that from happening, from that threshold being crossed. A grub preventer will not stop all grubs from existing. So sometimes people will be like, well, I put a grub preventer down and I saw a grub when I was doing my gardening. Okay, like that's okay. It's okay to have some grubs in your yard, just so people like hear this. But yes, something like this probably should be treated. You can see that there are quite a few in a very small period of or a very small space. Next is billbug, bluegrass billbug.
You can tell billbug if you have something like this, go to the margins where the brown and the green come close to each other, and you literally pinch, grab the grass and pull up. We're not talking about grub damage where the whole sod will come up. The leaves and the crowns will actually come up in your fingers. And that's a good indication of billbugs. Billbugs bite at the base of the plant. They put their eggs in there, the eggs hatch, they eat their way out. It cuts the plant off at the surface, at the ground level. And that's a good way to tell if you have billbug. If you do, then you can get into a preventative program the next year. There is some curative, but obviously you've got a lot of damage. So we might want to try to prevent that the next year and get the population back down in the yard.
This will come back surprisingly well in the fall, whereas grubs can be a real problem where it's not going to come back.
Acelepryn, the grub preventer that we carry, also would stop billbugs, just so you know.
Is billbug a common thing around here?
Yeah, it depends on the year. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we saw several yards.
Yeah, it's spotty. Year to year, very common in central Iowa, the western part of Iowa along the Missouri, they just get eaten up by it. That's probably where that picture came from.
Yeah, this one is not a bug, but it's related to bugs. What's happening here? Yeah, skunk or possibly raccoon. It's hard to say for sure, but they were looking for something tasty, looking for grubs, right? Yep.
Looks like the pigs got out.
I have pictures of where they have wild boar in the south, and you've never seen damage till you've seen wild boar damage. They will just tear it completely to pieces.
Yep. Question I've been asked 3 times already today. Should I dethatch my yard? What do you two think?
No.
Yep. Nope.
Is that different from
Yes, if you need it.
So aerification would be my recommendation. If you have a thatch problem, let's get some cores, some soil up on top of the thatch and let the microorganisms in the soil decay that thatch naturally. You could also top dress with some soil if you have a thatch problem. but ripping and raking aggressively, generally, I'm not a big fan of it, sorry.
Not a spring raking.
Well, spring raking for maybe getting the extra leaves from the trees off your yard, but just going in for to wake up the lawn, no. I just lower the mower down maybe a quarter or half inch and mow the brown ends off. That's just a personal thing with me. We used to power rake. We still own a power rake, and we'd haul off truckloads of grass clippings off the yard in the spring of the year. But aerification has many more benefits and does the same thing. It'll get rid. If you have a thatch problem, it's going to get rid of the thatch for you.
Yep. Think of dethatching like a Band-Aid. It's treating a symptom but not a problem, right? Aeration actually would treat the problem that is causing the thatch to build up. So if you're going to spend your time and your money, I would spend money and time on aeration, right? Next question, should I overseed my lawn?
Our position is no. The question is, why would you want to overseed your lawn? And if the answer is generally, I need to thicken my yard up, overseeding is not going to thicken your yard up. The same thing that has happened to your yard to make it thin now is going to be the same thing that's going to happen to the new seed. We need to figure out why you're not happy with the density of your yard now. The other thing that Sarah mentioned earlier, there are so many different types of Kentucky bluegrass, for example, out there. The chances of us matching your yard is very slim, and you could end up with a quilt-looking yard. You might have a thicker yard because the grass seed may be caught, but then you could have the problem with different colors, different growth habits, drought resistance, disease resistance. So I would rather see you figure out why the lawn is not as thick as you would like it, and that's usually could be compaction, it could be fertilizer, it could be water. Those things would also affect that seed, that overseeding. And generally speaking, how are you going to put the seed down? Are you going to broadcast it? Well, that's not going to do anything. You need to have seed-soil contact. So now you're going to have to go get an interseeder, a slit seeder, to get the seed planted down into the soil. And after that happens, the lawn heals itself back up before the grass seed germinates. So it smothers out the seed. You get very little, maybe 5%, if you use a slit seeder to overseed your yard. And if you do it any other way where you just broadcast out, you're wasting your time. Unless it's a bare spot. That would be the exception. Then, of course, you could put some seed in a bare spot. But overseeding to solve a problem is generally not recommended.
Oh, some fall pro tips. What is the best time of year to do sod projects?
Fall?
Yeah. Fall, spring, pretty much anytime it's not 1,000,000 degrees outside, right? If you are in the early spring or the late fall, it's nice for you because you don't have to water as much because the temperatures are not as high. So we call that the smart person's time of year to do sod projects. But you can put sod down any time of year.
That's an important issue. I get that question all the time. The best time is fall to get it established well, but I get the question all the time, can I do it now? And can I do it in the spring? Can I do it in the summer? You can. That's the nice thing about sod, but it's going to be harder. You're going to take more water if it's in the heat of summer. I've had a few calls. I was talking to Mike about this a couple of days ago. I've had calls from construction people who have a big project like a bank or an apartment complex or something where they don't get paid until the sod is down. And I'll get calls, can I sod in December? Can I sod in January? Can I sod in February? And if you're not covered with snow, the answer is yes, but you can't let it get dry. You got to keep it moist. So you're shipping sod today. I see you got a truck Monday. You got truckloads of sod out there. So much more flexibility with sod than there is with seed.
What about seed projects? Best time of year to seed?
Fall, from August 15th to September 15th to be the prime time for us here in eastern Iowa.
You can go a little later than that, but you're taking a chance. So every week you go after September 15, there's a little less chance of success.
Yep. Aerating. There are a couple of things here. How often should I aerate? Should I pull plugs or poke holes? Ideal patterns? Should I pick up the plugs? I have a gentleman who picked up every plug off of his yard. The answer is no, you don't. You should leave them right where they are. And should I wear these shoes, these very trendy shoes on the right? What do we think?
I'll let you start.
Probably not.
Don't you have these?
I have a pair of those. I have a pair exactly like that from like 40 years ago. They were selling them in magazines and stuff. The best way, if you're going to aerify, take a plug out of it that comes up on the surface. That is by far the best for thatch control and for compaction control. Solid tine like that can work. They'll use it on golf course greens and stuff more effectively, but for a lawn, core aeration is going to be by far the best.
Yeah, and there's core aeration and there's core aeration. The ones that look like a star wheel that just rolls behind your garden tractor that are spaced 8 to 12 inches apart, it's not worth your time. If you go back to your previous slide.
Yeah, you need the vertical tine.
So what we're looking for, ideally, and this was research that was done at Iowa State many years ago, Dr. Agnew, I think, had the study, getting a pattern that is 3 inches by 3 inches in every direction was the most effective at improving the quality of the turf. And going about 3 inches deep is also, that's the majority of the feeder roots are in the top 3 inches on Kentucky bluegrass. So you can see the ones that roll behind your garden tractor, you might get one every 10 to 12 inches apart. And a lot of times they're not very heavy units, so they don't penetrate 3 inches deep. So there's aeration, and then there's good aeration.
Yeah. And how many times? Generally once per year is going to be fine. I haven't done it on my lawn for a number of years. And often you can get by without it. But if you've got a compaction problem, certain types of soils need more aerification, once in the fall should probably be enough.
Yep. Question from someone in the room. My house was built last fall. When should I start aerating and how often should I do it?
This spring.
Yep.
And they sodded last year?
It was new last, yeah. Because I'm guessing that it was probably a typical installation where the site is heavily compacted from all the subs. The cement trucks, the lumber trucks, everybody drove on the yard. The soil was, again, probably from the basement, was a lot of it spread on the surface, and it was probably worked to a very firm consistency. And unfortunately, we've got to deal with that now that the lawn is established. So we need to get air in the soil as soon as we can. So I would start this spring and get some aerification going. And if you have severe compaction, Sarah did on their yard when their house was built, you can hire people that come in with a deeper tine that is a solid tine that will help relieve the compaction deeper without pulling out a huge core. And that's okay. So you could do both. You can do the shallow core 3-inch pattern, and that's going to loosen up that top 3 inches. But in her yard, it was like concrete below 3 inches. So we got contractor to come in 8 inches deep with a solid tine and loosen it up and gave it a place for the water to go in and the deeper roots to start going. There was a question here.
Is there a two-liter rate system?
Yeah, as long as it's not muddy, as long as that.
Growth though for recovery.
Yeah, that's true.
Can be too early.
Yeah, as long as the plug comes out. What we're after is, if it's soft and mushy like it is now, it's probably going to just push the plug down and increase compaction at the bottom of the hole. So we want that plug to come out.
Best time is late August, early September.
Are the ride-on ones okay, or is that where you last how much heavier than the
Yeah, the ride-on ones are fine. We have a commercial one that is a walk-behind one that's 24 inches wide, but it does the 3x3 pattern, and it's a beast. It's an absolute beast. It gets 3 inches consistently across the yard. So ride-on, walk-on, as long as it can do that pattern. And the size of the core, generally 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch diameter core is ideal.
Okay, name this weed. I'm gonna give answers out here. So Creeping Charlie, and I want you to talk about dandelions in the fall, which blows people's minds because dandelions show up in the spring, but why do we talk about dandelions in the fall?
Basically, my recommendation is to treat the dandelions in the fall because we have the perfect conditions in the soil to kill all the way to the bottom of the root. Remember, we talked about translocating the herbicide all the way to the end of the root, whether it's quackgrass or in this case dandelions. Dandelion roots can go quite deep in the soil. You're going to get dandelions flowering this spring. Everybody's going to get out there weed killer, and they're going to go out there and they're going to squirt that flower. But the depth, the taproot down at the bottom is still dormant. That herbicide is not going to do anything down there. That dandelion is going to regenerate itself probably in May or June. In the fall, we have the exact opposite. We have nice warm soil all the way to the bottom of the taproot. A little squirt of 2,4-D, and it's going to go all the way to the bottom and take care of that taproot, and it will not come back. And you'll be surprised how many of these seeds will be in your yard this fall, germinated, waiting to become flowers in the spring, where a squirt of 2,4-D in the fall takes care of them. Yeah.
October is probably the best time for broadleaf herbicides.
Yeah. Also, you're avoiding your gardens. Springtime applications, you know, we've got our tomatoes out there, grapes, things like that, sensitive to drift of the herbicide. In the fall, those are done for the year, and there's less likely that you'll have off-target damage. Question back here?
What about white violets or violet?
Violets are, the lawn care people like to call those callback weeds, because there's certain weeds that, like clover's another one, where many of our herbicides don't get it very well, and those violets are particularly hard to kill because they've got a waxy material on the leaf. So they're some of the more expensive combination herbicides will do a better job on that. Putting a surfactant in the tank with the material can help because of that waxy surface, but they're tough. They're hard to get. Creeping Charlie is a timing thing. You try to get that in the spring with a standard, you can have the best herbicide ever, it'll curl up, it'll come back. I did some studies a few years ago on a big patch of this I had in Ames, and I put out broadleaf herbicides starting in August and then every 2 weeks all the way into December. It was a year we didn't get a lot of snow, so I got out there in the middle of December. And by Christmas time, it didn't look like I'd killed any of it. I thought, man, this stuff is just not going to die. In the spring, it was the later applications. It was the Thanksgiving and the first part of December treatments that did the best job. Because at that time of year, the materials translocate the best. So late for Creeping Charlie.
We used to say after the first killing frost around here, which generally is around October 15th. So when I'm spraying my farm here, we wait until that first killing frost and then we spray. And if you notice on the labels, you're going to have a range. It might say 1 to 2 ounces, let's say, per 1,000 square feet. In the spring, you're going to use the 2 ounce rate because it's harder to get the weeds in the spring. And in the fall, you can probably have very good success with the 1 ounce rate. So you cut your cost in half, you cut your exposure to the environment in half, and you get better results, or just as good a result.
Yeah. Creeping Charlie's all timing.
Spring, but you have to use more?
You're not going to be successful. It's gonna look sick, and then it's going to be bad. And
what is the herbicide you use for that?
there's many. There's 2,4-D, MCPP, dicamba, triclopyr, fluroxypyr. The broadleaf herbicides. The best, I would go with a good combination. Check with the store you're buying it from. Do you guys handle that? I don't know. Okay, check with the store you're buying from, and they have some really good combination products, and then go late with that. Standard old 2,4-D is probably not going to do it.
In the fall, should I mow my lawn super short?
Yes, if you want the leaves from your trees to go to your neighbor's yard.
Yep, it does work, but it is not necessary. Biologically, it is not necessary for you to do that. It is just an aesthetic choice that you're making at that point. Do I need to bag my leaves off of my trees? The answer is generally no if you're mulching them with your mower and stuff. If you have like a sugar maple that drops them and it's like a carpet in that area, you might want to remove some of that leaf matter so you're not smothering anything underneath. But ultimately, those leaves are similar to the leaves of grasses. They're going to biodegrade. They're going to create organic material for your lawn.
There's been a number of studies on this where the results were surprising. Purdue and Michigan did some work on this where they had plots and they put different amounts of leaves, like 3 inches, 4 inches, like this deep. And surprisingly, even the deep ones did not hurt. You had the same quality lawn the next year. So they can break down pretty effectively. You don't necessarily need to remove them.
Yeah. What does winterizing actually mean? To me, like, sorry, I think it's a question about feeding.
Oh, right. Well, we recommend if you were only going to fertilize once a year, fall would be the best. If you missed the fall and you were thinking, well, I'll just wait till spring, I would still have you put it down late fall. It's going to be better than putting it down the following spring. When you put it down in the spring, we have those conditions where the air is warm and the roots are cold. So you're going to get a lot of leaf growth when you stimulate it with a shot of fertilizer early in the spring. In the fall, we have just the opposite. We're going to get a lot of root growth because the soil's warm and the air is cooled way down. So that fertilizer is going to build you up a nice, healthy root system for the next year, better than trying to say, well, I'll just do that in April, if you're only, say, doing it once a year. So that's what we think about winterizing, is setting it up for next year.
Yeah, once per year, I'd say early September would be your best use of material and money.
Questions? Oh, thanks everybody. Woo, that was great. Yes, questions.
On winterizing, do you want to pick up the leaves before you winterize, or does it matter?
That's an interesting point. The leaves don't hurt the grass if you leave them on there. However, you're not going to have very good coverage with an herbicide you're putting on in the fall if it's covered with leaves and that sort of thing. So there may be other reasons to pull it off. So sometimes that is the reason. You're going to get the leaves off there and then put an herbicide down late. If I'm going to put my herbicide down in November for creeping Charlie, I'm going to have to take the leaves off.
Way back in the back.
How do you determine the sod warm? When is it warm? What temperature is that?
So like soil temperatures? Yeah, so Iowa State University Extension Office has a link or has a website that you can go to see soil temperatures. It'll tell you the previous 3 days. So if you are ever curious, that is my favorite resource to use. If you Google Iowa State Extension soil temperatures, it's the first link that comes up, and it's a great resource for knowing when to put things down.
A lot of the local TV stations too will give it in the spring because gardeners are always interested in soil temperatures and stuff. So if you watch the local news, they'll sometimes say, and soil temperature is this week.
Yep. Any more questions?
Suppose one has a portion of the lawn that has been damaged by either drought or a fungus. How do you prepare that portion of the lawn before reseeding or sodding?
You have to repeat that.
Yep, so she has a portion of her yard that has been damaged by either drought or fungus. How do you prepare it for sod or seed for repairs? Or how do you, prepare for repairs?
Yeah, so if you're going to sod, you would need to remove the vegetation that is dead so that the roots on the sod are touching the soil. Okay, I'd like to say you can just throw it on the spot and everything will be fine, but unfortunately, no. So if you're preparing for seed, again, you're going to remove the dead material on the top because seed has to touch soil to establish itself. But you're also going to need to plant that seed about 1/4 of an inch deep. So you may want to remove the vegetation, put the seed down, and then top dress it with some soil over the top to cover that and get your seed soil contact that way.
I suspect if there are any more questions left in the room, they're probably very specific to people's lawns. And so I would like to make a motion to adjourn. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your support. If you have any more questions for us, my contact information is up here. If you scan that QR code, it'll take you to all kinds of social media stuff that we do. If there's anything that you can do to help small businesses succeed in this day and age, it is to leave a review online for them. Please consider doing that for us. And speaking of, in your folders, there is a piece of paper that is for feedback. If you have any feedback for me on how we could do this better in the future, I would be very interested in what you all have to say. You do not have to write your name on it. You can just leave it on the table. I promise I won't charge you twice as much for your product in the future. And yes, please, for those of you who still need to pick up product, we have people across the way to help you load. Thank you for coming. I am grateful for all.